December 1944, the dying breath of Japan's empire. The Pacific had turned crimson with defeat, but on a remote speck of land in the Philippines called Lubang Island, one young officer still believed victory could be wrestled back from fate. Second Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda, just 22, stepped off a transport boat under a sky heavy with smoke. Trained in intelligence and guerrilla tactics, he was not the kind of man who surrendered. His orders were clear: sabotage the airstrip, hinder the enemy's advance, and hold the island at any cost. At any cost. As he saluted his superiors, one command echoed above all. You are to fight until the Imperial Army returns. You are forbidden to die by your own hand. Those words sank deep into his bones. To Onoda, they weren't instructions, they were sacred law. Weeks later, when American forces stormed Lubang, the sky exploded with artillery. Japanese defenses shattered. Radios went silent, the chain of command disintegrated into chaos, yet Onoda refused to flee. Gathering 3 soldiers, Yuichi Akatsu, Shuichi Shimada, and Kinshichi Kozuka, he led them into the mountains, carrying rifles, meager rations, and unshakable faith. The jungle became their fortress. Green walls closed around them, humid and eternal. Each day they moved deeper into its maze until even the sea was just a whisper. They built shelters from palm leaves, foraged wild fruit, and listened for enemy footsteps in every rustle. When, months later, they found leaflets fluttering through the trees, thin papers declaring, "The war has ended, lay down your arms," Onoda held them over the fire. "Forged," he said coldly. "The Americans are clever." His men nodded, half in fear, half in belief. At night, while insects screamed and rain lashed the roof of their hut, Onoda sat, cleaning his rifle, eyes sharp, heart steady. The world might surrender, but he would not. He would hold his post, even if no one else did. From that moment, Lubang Island became its own battlefield, not between nations, but between one man's duty and the truth he refused to see.
Rain hammered the jungle roots through the endless Philippine nights. Each drop was a heartbeat, a ticking clock marking time no one kept anymore. For Hiroo Onoda and his 3 men, the war had become a rhythm. Hunt by dawn, hide by dusk, wait for orders that never came. Months bled into years. The jungle devoured everything: their uniforms, their rations, their doubts. And still, they fought shadows. Every moving branch was a spy. Every farmer's torchlight in the valley below was an American patrol. Then came the second wave of leaflets. This time, the paper was cleaner. The print bore the imperial seal. The message carried the emperor's name, declaring the unthinkable: Japan had surrendered. Onoda studied the leaflet under moonlight, his brow furrowed, his lips pressed tight. "Ridiculous," he said finally. "They want us to believe our emperor has spoken through enemy hands." He held it close to the flame until it turned to ash. "Sir," murmured Akatsui, the youngest of them, "what if it's true?" Onoda's glare cut through the smoke. "You insult His Majesty by doubting our orders. We are soldiers. We don't decide when the war ends. Tokyo will come for us." But Tokyo never came. Food grew scarce. They raided farms at night, stealing rice, salt, and livestock. The villagers called them the Mountain Devils. Once, when soldiers dropped family photographs with messages begging them to return, Onoda stared at one for a long time, a mother's smile, a home he might never see again, and then tore it in half. He told his men the enemy had learned to fake handwriting, but the doubt stayed. In 1949, Akatsu could take no more. One dawn, Onoda woke to find his rifle gone, his mat empty. He waited, thinking the boy would return. He never did. Later, when leaflets claimed Akatsu had surrendered, Onoda dismissed it as deception again, but part of him knew it was real. From that day, every whisper in the forest became a threat. Trust died quietly in that heat. Now there were three. Three soldiers clinging to a war that had ended half a decade ago, fighting ghosts in a jungle that no longer cared.
And yet, as the wind sighed through the trees, Onoda whispered to himself, "Orders are orders. I will obey, even if I am the last." By the mid-1950s, the jungle no longer felt like a hiding place. It had become a world of its own. Thick vines wove through their shelters, blurring the line between man and nature. Mosquitoes, snakes, and hunger were constant enemies. Yet to Hiroo Onoda, they were easier to fight than the truth. He and Kinshichi Kozuka and Shoichi Shimada had turned into myths whispered about by villagers. They raided coconut farms, seized rice, and burned storehouses to disrupt the enemy. Each act, they believed, served the emperor. They read every headline dropped from planes, news of atomic bombs, of peace treaties, of an occupation, and still Onoda declared them lies. "We are soldiers of the empire," he'd say, clutching his rifle like a prayer. "Japan will return for us. Our duty is to stay alive until that day." But time was winning its own war. Their uniforms were shredded, ammunition corroded, the rifles still fired, but barely. Even their language began to fade, reduced to whispers and orders. When they spoke of home, it felt like describing a dream they'd half forgotten. Then came the moment that cracked what little certainty remained. During a skirmish with a local search party, Shimada was shot in the leg. Onoda dragged him through miles of mud, fashioning a stretcher from bamboo and rope. For weeks, he tended the wound with boiled leaves and bandages torn from his own clothes. But the fever came. Shimada's breaths grew shallow, his eyes glassy. One night, he simply stopped breathing. Onoda sat beside the body until dawn. He didn't cry. He just saluted. "Your spirit returns to the emperor," he whispered. But when he buried Shimada beneath the ferns, something inside him went with him. After that, it was just Onoda and Kozuka, two silhouettes moving through a forest that had learned their scent. The villagers called them ghosts, men who belonged to another time. Sometimes children claimed to hear them talking in the trees. Hunters would find their footprints and nothing else. The world had entered a new age, radios, television, rockets to the sky. But Lubang Island was trapped in a different year, 1945. Every sunrise, Onoda would polish his rifle, check his knife, and whisper the same words he'd said for decades. "We fight until command relieves us. We do not surrender. We do not die in vain." The jungle echoed nothing back, only the call of distant birds and the soft, steady hum of time moving on without him. In February 1974, 29 years after Japan's surrender, the jungle still whispered with the movements of one man. Locals said he was a spirit, a shadow that lived among the trees. Hunters swore they saw glints of metal in the moonlight, the flash of a bayonet. But it wasn't a ghost. It was Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda, still carrying out his orders as if the world hadn't stopped burning. That same month, across the sea in Japan, a restless young traveler named Norio Suzuki packed a small bag, a tent, and a camera.
He told his friends, half joking, "I'm going to find Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order." They laughed. But Suzuki wasn't joking. He was 24, idealistic, a dreamer searching for meaning in a country that had forgotten its own ghosts. When he reached Lubang Island, the villagers warned him, "Don't go into the mountains. The old soldier is still there. He shoots anyone who comes near." But Suzuki smiled, the kind of smile that belongs to men who aren't afraid to believe. For days, he wandered through the dense forest, leaving notes in Japanese. "Onoda-san, the war is over. Japan is peaceful. Please come home." At night, he camped under the stars, whispering into the darkness, "You've done enough, soldier." Then, one afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds, he heard a voice behind him, sharp, commanding, "Don't move." Suzuki turned slowly. A thin man stood among the trees, uniform torn, face bearded, rifle steady. His eyes burned with suspicion and fear. "Who are you?" the man demanded. Suzuki bowed deeply. "Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda," he said softly. "I am Japanese, like you. I came to bring you home." For a long moment, silence filled the forest. The only sound was the rustle of wind through leaves. Onoda's eyes searched him, the clothes, the accent, the sincerity. "Lies," Onoda said. "The enemy sent you." Suzuki shook his head, smiling gently. "No enemy would know your name. No enemy would call you lieutenant." Something flickered in Onoda's eyes, a spark of doubt or maybe recognition. The young man before him was unarmed, fearless, and somehow familiar. They sat together beneath the trees. Suzuki showed him photographs, Tokyo's lights, bullet trains, a world Onoda could barely imagine. "This is Japan now. The war is over."
But Onoda looked at the pictures for a long time before handing them back. His voice was quiet, but firm. "My orders have not changed. I will not surrender until my commanding officer relieves me." Suzuki nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer all along. "Then I'll bring him to you," he said. For the first time in 29 years, Onoda smiled, faintly, awkwardly, like a man relearning what it meant to be human. As night fell, they sat together by a small fire, a soldier trapped in yesterday, and a boy who believed in tomorrow. And for a few brief hours, time stood still. Weeks passed after that first meeting in the jungle. Norio Suzuki returned to Japan, keeping his promise. Newspapers printed his story, the ghost soldier still fighting a war that ended decades ago. The world was stunned. But for Onoda, hidden deep within the same familiar trees, time stood still. Every sunrise felt like another test of loyalty. Then, one humid morning, a distant voice echoed through the trees, a voice from another life. It called his name in the sharp commanding tone of the Imperial Army. "Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda, this is Major Yoshimi Taniguchi." The sound froze him. His breath caught. That name belonged to his commanding officer, the man who had given him his final orders 30 years earlier. For a long moment, Onoda didn't move. He thought it might be a trap. But when he stepped into a clearing and saw the old man waiting there, dressed in a civilian suit, bowing low before him, he knew it was real. Taniguchi's hair was gray, his shoulders bent, but his eyes still carried the weight of command. He saluted with trembling hands. "Lieutenant," he said, voice thick with emotion, "you have fought enough. The war ended in 1945. I have come to relieve you of your duties." Onoda's rifle shook in his grip. "You relieve me?" Taniguchi nodded solemnly. "Yes, lay down your weapon. The Empire thanks you for your service." Silence fell between them. The jungle seemed to lean closer, listening. Slowly, Onoda lowered his rifle. His fingers brushed over its worn metal one last time. The weapon that had been his heartbeat, his faith, his last connection to purpose. Then he knelt and placed it gently on the ground. He removed his sword, polished though rusted by years of rain, and set it beside the rifle. Then he took a deep breath, the kind of breath you take when you finally stop carrying the world on your shoulders.
For 30 years he had lived by an order. For the first time he was hearing another one that set him free. Tears welled in Taniguchi's eyes. The once young officer before him had turned into an old man made of bone and memory. "You did well, Onoda," he said softly. "You brought no shame to Japan." Onoda bowed deeply, his voice shaking. "I am sorry it took me so long." When they walked out of the trees together, the sunlight broke through the canopy, blinding, golden, almost unreal. For Hiroo Onoda, it was the first time in 30 years that he saw the sky without fear. When the order was given, the jungle seemed to exhale with him. For nearly 30 years, Hiroo Onoda had obeyed a command that no one remembered but him. Now, at last, the war inside him began to crack. He walked beside Major Taniguchi and Norio Suzuki through a corridor of palms that glowed gold in the rising sun. Each step felt unreal, roots and mud beneath his boots, the rifle light in his hands, as though the weapon itself had lost its weight. Birds shrieked overhead. Somewhere far away, a radio played a pop song carried on the wind. The sound made him pause. It was Japan, alive and laughing, something he had convinced himself could never exist again. When the three men reached the edge of the village, the world exploded in color. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted. Filipino soldiers and American observers lined the road, staring at the apparition that stepped from the trees. Thin, weather-worn, wrapped in a uniform patched with jungle moss. He bowed low, eyes down, clutching the rifle he'd guarded since 1944. "I am Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda of the Imperial Japanese Army. I have returned to surrender my arms." The crowd fell silent. He unsheathed his sword, still gleaming, oiled with coconut for decades, and placed it carefully atop his rifle. A soldier collected them, trembling. Onoda then removed his dagger, a family heirloom once meant for seppuku, and set it beside the others. He had never used it. That was the true miracle. As he straightened, the Philippine president approached, offering pardon for the attacks carried out during Onoda's years of resistance. "You are forgiven," the translator said. The old soldier bowed again, tears glinting beneath his lashes. For 30 years he had lived as an enemy. In one sentence, he was free. He glanced once more toward the forest, the only home he had known. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper of farewell. Then he turned away forever. When he boarded the plane to Tokyo, the engines roared like a memory of war. Onoda stared through the window at the receding jungle, a dark green sea below. He whispered softly, not to anyone else, but to himself, "Mission complete." After 29 years of silence, the soldier who refused to surrender finally laid down his arms. When Hiroo Onoda stepped onto the airstrip, the world erupted in applause, camera flashes, and disbelief. He had entered the jungle as a soldier of the empire and emerged as the ghost of a vanished age. He bowed deeply before the gathered crowd, his uniform still crisp despite its patches, his rifle slung over his shoulder for the last time. With calm precision, he laid his Arisaka rifle, his sword, and the dagger his mother had given him on a small wooden table. The blades gleamed faintly in the sunlight, relics of loyalty that had survived 3 decades of silence and rain. He said, "I have completed my duty. I am sorry it took so long." Applause rippled through the crowd, but for Onoda, the sound felt distant, unreal. His war had lasted 29 years, a lifetime of belief built on a single command. Now that command was gone, and with it, his purpose. As he boarded the transport back to Japan, the jungle he'd once called his fortress shimmered beneath the plane's wings. He stared at it through the window, the trees, the rivers, the trails only he knew, and whispered a final salute. "Forgive me, comrades. The mission is done." Tokyo was a dream he didn't recognize. Neon lights, endless traffic, people rushing nowhere. The streets he'd left behind were gone, replaced by a nation that no longer bowed to emperors or believed in war. Strangers called him a hero, others called him a fool. Onoda bowed to both. He no longer cared for names, only for silence. In the years that followed, he would write, teach, and live quietly. Yet sometimes, when the wind rustled through the trees outside his home, he would close his eyes and hear the jungle again. Kozuka laughing, Shimada whispering, the rain falling on a hut roof. He had fought alone because he couldn't accept the end. But in that refusal, he had found something deeper than victory. Endurance, faith, and the will to hold on to meaning when the world had none left to give. Hiroo Onoda died in 2014 at 91 years old. But on Lubang Island, where vines still twist around rusted shell casings and the jungle hums with eternal life, there remains a legend whispered by the wind of the man who fought for 29 years because he didn't know how to stop believing.